The Battle of Nineveh is conventionally dated between 613 and 611 BC, with 612 BC being the most supported date. An allied army composed of Medes and the Chaldeans, rebelling Assyrians and Babylonians, together with Scythians and Cimmerians, besieged it and sacked it, leading to the destruction of the Neo-Assyrian Empire over the next 3 years as the dominant state in the ancient Near East, as well as the destruction of what was at the time the greatest city in the world, covering 750 hectares. After this battle, the archeological record shows that the capital of the once mighty Assyrian Empire was extensively de-urbanized and depopulated. Babylon became the imperial center of Mesopotamia for the first time in over 1,000 years, leading to the Neo-Babylonian Empire, claiming imperial continuity as a new dynasty. Background: the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which arose in the 10th century BC, succeeding the Middle Assyrian Empire, is generally regarded to have reached its peak in the 8th and 7th centuries BC, and was the largest empire the world had yet seen. By the reign of Ashurbanipal, it controlled or held in vassalage most of the nations and city-states from the Caucasus Mountains in the north to Egypt, Arabia and Nubia in the south, and central Iran, Persia in the east to Cyprus and the Hellenic and Phoenician Mediterranean coasts of Anatolia and the Levant in the west. However, after the death of Ashurbanipal in 627 BC, the once mighty empire of Assyria was becoming increasingly volatile, with Assyria proper erupting into a series of internal civil wars. This led many of the subject states, many of which had their own political dynasties, to become restive, whereas neighboring states and groups, such as the Medes, Persians, Babylonians, Chaldeans, Scythians, Cimmerians, became increasingly hostile under the Assyrian hegemony. Assyrian had, by the accounts of its own records, been brutal even by the standards of the time, and thus had accumulated many hitherto impotent enemies. It had been weakened by a three-front struggle to maintain power in Egypt, a costly but victorious war against the Elamites, and put down rebellions amongst the southern Mesopotamian Babylonian kinsmen, even though the core of the empire had been largely at peace. The Assyrian monarchs wrote constantly of internal danger and fear of palace intrigue, and feared a rebellion. Upon the death of Ashurbanipal, a series of bitter and bloody wars of succession occurred, weakening the empire. The Neo-Assyrian domination over the Middle East, Asia Minor, Caucasus and East Mediterranean gradually began to fade from 625 BC onwards. An alliance grew up of external states, such as the Chaldeans, who took advantage of the upheavals in Assyria to take control of much of Babylonia with the aid of the Babylonians themselves. They were building Babylonia into a power that is termed Neo-Babylonian. The goal was the overthrow of the Assyrian dynasty, the taking of the capital, Nineveh, and the transferal of the seat of Mesopotamian power to Babylon. Nineveh was not only a political capital, but home to one of the great libraries of Akkadian tablets and a recipient of tribute from across the Near East. Account of the battle. According to the Babylonian chronicles by which we date the battle, there was a bitter 12-year struggle between Babylon and Assyria, as well as civil wars in Assyria itself. They describe that in the 10th year of Nabopolassar the Babylonians defeated the Assyrian army and marched up the river, sacking Main, Sahiri and Ballyhu. The conflict renewed the next year, with the Assyrians mustering their army and throwing the Babylonians back to Takritan. Nabopolassar stationed his army in the fortress of Takritan, and the two armies did battle the next year. The Assyrians were beaten and retreated to Assyria. The Babylonians then allied with the Medes, Persians, Cimmerians and Scythians. The Median army took Tarbasu, near Nineveh, and encamped nearby, and then attacked the city of Ashur, with the Babylonian text recounting how in 612 BC their allies destroyed Ashur's temples and sacked the city, but their army did not reach the city until after the plundering had been done. Later the same year, the Babylonians mustered the army again and joined with Cyaxares encamping against Nineveh. They laid siege to the city for 3 months and in August finally broke the defenses and plundered the city, burning it behind, declaring that the king in Nineveh bowed down in vassalage. The Assyrian king Sin-Shishkun was killed in the siege. His brother Ashur-uballit II was made king of Assyria. He refused to submit, however, and successfully fought his way out of Nineveh, founding a final capital at Aran. According to the tradition laid out in Diodorus, the Tigris River was flooded, entering into the city, while his account is often suspect. This aspect has been given attention. The Allied armies entered the area of the outer wall and the fort to enter the palace. Temples were sacked and finally the palace was burned, though this did not destroy the city, and may have aided the preservation of clay texts. According to the account in Nahum, one of the Old Testament prophets, if read as history rather than prophecy, the battle went on for months, and fighting was in each house and street. There would be several more campaigns against Assyria by the Neo-Babylonians and their allies, including one against an allied Egyptian-Assyrian army. Thus, while the Battle of Nineveh was a turning point in the war, Ashur-uballit II would fight on for several more years. His ultimate fate is not known or recorded. He may have been killed at the fall of Haran in 608 BC, in a failed attempt to recapture it the following year, or at Carchemish in 605 BC, or simply disappeared into obscurity.